Turn up the dive, feel the vibe, get ready to ignite. Untold stories in the airways, flying through the night. Experience voices, tales so bold. Streaming live, the truth unfolds. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's so I remember I. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can't hide. Aliens in the attic, UFOs in the sky. Cryptids lurking, oh my, oh my. Ghosts in the hallway, whispering your name. The paranormal, the unexplained. Become a VIP, get the inside scoop. Unlock the mysteries, be part of the group. Live streaming stories, they're talking to you. Super chats buzzing, join the crew. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can hide. So if you've got the guts and you want to explore, tune into the Untold, it's what you're looking for. From aliens to ghosts and all that's unseen. Untold Radio Network, where the world's mysteries convene.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Greetings, all my fellow weirdos and weirdettes. Welcome to Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, and as always, I'm absolutely delighted that you've decided to spend the next hour of your life with me. Well, I hope you're going to spend the next hour of your life, because that's how long the show goes. Don't just log in and log off. Watch the whole show, because it's going to be a great one tonight. And whether you're watching live on Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Central, or on Facebook, or on X, or on YouTube, or perhaps you're watching on any of those sites afterwards where the show is archived, or listening to the audio-only version of the show, which goes out the following day across every podcast platform on the planet, I believe. Welcome. Thank you for spending some time with me. I really appreciate it. Of course, today, if you're watching live, is June 24. So it is the anniversary of Kenneth Arnold's historic sighting, which we'll be talking about at some length, I believe, tonight with tonight's guest, who, when he first saw 9, they weren't disc-shaped, and maybe we'll get into that, 9 objects moving very fast while he was piloting his plane near Mount Rainier in Washington State. This time last year, I'd only just got back from that area of Washington State, just near Mount Rainier, while I was filming a bit at Maury Island, which happened within 3 days of that sighting. It happened, in fact, 3 days before Arnold's sighting, supposedly. Chrisman and Dahl, Harold Chrisman and Fred Chrisman, rather, and Harold Dahl saw they both experienced at different times UFOs above Maury Island, and one which kind of exploded or poured out debris midair, and it kind of set the tone for much of the following UFO crashes and Men in Black and the like. Anyway, again, we're going to get into all of that tonight. Just quickly, before I bring on the guest, I just got back this year, anniversary of the Maury Island incident. Well, last year I was kind of at ground zero. This year, I was in the Evanston and Chicago area for the anniversary of Maury Island, and just the day or two before the 24th, which is an equally important but long forgotten location to the creation of UFO mythology and the promulgation of these stories, because that's where Ray Palmer was based. He moved through a number of offices in that period, from Amazing Stories to when he started Clark Publishing with Curtis Fuller and started publishing Fate magazine. And of course, it is Kenneth Arnold, or rather, Kenneth Arnold might have seen the sources originally, but Ray Palmer did more than anybody to publish that sighting, and shortly thereafter hired Kenneth Arnold to go to Maury Island to investigate that incident which happened there. So the last 2 years, I spent both of them at kind of, almost like boots on the ground level, where perhaps Kenneth Arnold was, and also then in the kind of office area where Ray Palmer was kind of, putting these stories together and directing Arnold to go and do the investigation at Maury Island. So I'm blessed that I was able to spend the weekend with my wonderful girlfriend and two of our daughters, as well as Marco Acevedo, who is Evanston-based graphic designer and incredible fortean. We're just incredibly erudite. Speaking of erudite, though, so is tonight's guest. So rather than rant on about what happened 78 years ago now, can you imagine? It might be better for me to actually talk to somebody who is very well versed in all of these stories. And we'll be talking about those stories and many more early UFO stories, and many more of the people who were involved in researching and investigating and writing about UFOs in the early days. Well, all of this lore, which we're also versed in now via the X-Files and Close Encounters and other, TV shows and various UFO mags and History Channel shows and everything else. But so much of it started with people like Palmer and Arnold and others who we'll be talking about tonight. So anyway, tonight's guest has been writing about flying saucers and UFOs for several years, and still finds the subject and the stories of the people involved fascinating. Besides his interest in all things fortean, his pursuits include paleontology, geology, hiking, bad movies, and mid-20th century electronic music. He has been a theatre person for most of his life. As a performer, he sticks to Shakespeare, and he makes his living as an I.A.T.S.E, Local 1 welder carpenter in the construction shop of the Metropolitan Opera. This is the second edition of his wonderful book, The Flying Saucer Investigators, which I just read and we'll be talking about tonight. And he has another saucer UFO-related book available titled Crash Saucers and Malevolent Aliens. And links to both of those books will be in the show notes, so you can just click through and easily access them after the show tonight or during the show tonight. At any rate, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome who I think is a kindred spirit, although I've never really talked to him before, the wonderful Charles Lear. Greetings.
Oh, hola, here and being wonderful.
Great to have you, man.
Yeah, really pleasure to talk to you.
Do you ever get the Lear question, like you're related to the Learjet family?
Absolutely, yeah. I've been told we're related, not closely enough to benefit from the fortune, but that's about it.
And of course, who's the famous quasi-early whistleblower? Is it John Lear?
John Lear, yeah.
Yeah, who came forward with much.
Well, John Lear is more. No, he wasn't a whistleblower.
Well, I mean, he was saying he understood some of the stories, right?
Yeah. No, he actually John Lear exploded onto the scene through UFO BBS, a bulletin board Paranet, the Paranet bulletin board system. So this is just before the internet, and he posted a screed, a lot of it based on Paul Benowitz's rantings and ravings, and so he basically because of his pedigree, I think he had like 140 airspeed records, and he flew about 140 different airplanes. He flew for the CIA. He did hold some airspeed records, I believe. But in any case, he had a really, really good pedigree, plus being the son of Bill Lear, the creator of the Lear jet and the 8-track tape. And he posted a screed on Paranet, basically talking about alien-human hybrids and the whole program of them combining cattle DNA and human DNA and big vats and underground bases. Like I said, a lot of it was based on Paul Benowitz's beliefs. Uh, who, if anybody's seen Mirage Men, they know the Paul Benowitz, Richard Doty story. But that's Crash Saucers, Malevolent Aliens. I go into that. But in any case, John Lear's and his crew, which included Bill Cooper and the name's escaping me at the moment, but John Lear's responsible for what's called the UFO dark side. So this is where the whole idea of this government alien conspiracy, where they made a deal with the aliens, said, "Oh, you go ahead and do your abductions. We'll look the other way. Just be cool." And the whole X-Files mythology came out of that, and so that's John Lear.
Yeah, all of that stuff's fascinating. Mirage Men is such a wonderful movie if people haven't seen it. I have had Richard Doty on Talking Weird before we were on this network, which was a fascinating conversation. He's a very interesting figure.
Well, yeah, my take on Doty is that he was on Kitchen Patrol. Nobody talks about that. He was on Kitchen Patrol in his very last year of service. He was stripped of his AFOSI because he was caught lying in Germany. And he was a New Mexico state policeman, not treated with any deference. He received 2 reprimands for crashing cars. And he still goes around promoting himself as if he's still, in connection with deep underground military intelligence contacts. So
I think regardless of Doty's connections, though, what fascinates me is I do think he was more responsible for the promulgation of these stories than he likes to admit.
I think he created the MJ-12 documents, quite frankly.
Yeah,
I think that's what I said.
I think it's very possible too. And I think Project Serpo was, although he denied that on the show, was him as well. I mean,
but guy's got his IP address. They linked it.
To be personally, I like. By the way,
to him. Anyway,
personally, I like Doty. Like he was a real.
That's
gentleman.
what I hear. A lot of people say, like when they
nice.
meet him, he's a very, which is probably why he's lasted as long as he's lasted.
We should rewind though, because let's get you on another day to do the Benowitz thing, because I bet we'd have a lot of fun talking about the dark side of ufology. That'd be fun. But let's because it's the anniversary tonight of the Arnold or the day of the Arnold.
This is the Pleasance. This is the book I really enjoyed writing. Crash Saucers and Malevolent Aliens. I did enjoy it, but it's didn't have the same. This is the golden era of UFOs and flying saucers.
We'll have you want to do the Crash Saucers one.
Yeah, absolutely.
It'd be fun.
Sure.
But maybe for those who, I mean, everybody probably has heard of the Kenneth Arnold side, but maybe to set the scene, I'll let you a brief overview of that, and then a segue into the kind of the budgeting or ufology or the Summer of the Saucers flap, or
Well, on this date in 1947, June 24th, Kenneth Arnold was I've got it here. A 32-year-old no-nonsense businessman, pilot, and former Eagle Scout had seen some strange somethings while flying near Mount Rainier. 2 p.m. on June 24th. So 1947. So he was looking for an aircraft that had a military aircraft that had crashed just on his own time, and he didn't find it. But as he was flying, he saw 9 crescent-shaped somethings that were going really fast, and he estimated their speeds because they were going between Mount Baker and Mount Rainier, and he knew the distance between the mountains, so he was able to estimate their speed, and he figured they were traveling around 1,000 miles per hour. So he landed in Yakima, Washington, told the general manager of the aircraft company that ran the airport that he had seen something, drew pictures of the craft, and then he flew off to Pendleton, Oregon. Well, as he was flying away, the word got out. And this is before the internet, so apparently over the phone. But he was met by reporters when uh, he landed in Pendleton. And for the next 3 days, he was besieged by newsmen. And he told the reporters that the craft flew erratically like a saucer if you skip one across the water. And so reporter Bill Biquette for the East Oregonian de Pendleton wrote that Arnold had described the objects as saucer-like and their motion like a fish flipping in the sun. The story went out on the news wires. Other papers reported that Arnold had seen saucer-like objects, and the Chicago Sun picked up the article, and their headline for that same day was "Supersonic Flying Saucers Sighted by Idaho Pilot." So everybody attributes Bill Biquette for the flying saucers thing, but it was actually the Chicago Sun that first called them flying saucers, even though they were flying crescents. But it's good old UFO world. The crescents become discs and saucers, and that's what witnesses reported seeing for umpteen years after.
I've always been fascinated how that description seems to have had such an impact on the collective unconscious that then sources were seen. Chris Aubeck recently, I don't know if you read Chris Aubeck's.
Yeah, and he wrote with Jacques Vallée.
He did Wonders in the Sky, and then he wrote a book called he's written several books, but one of his book Sources is about how, and I had no idea, I wrote my PhD dissertation on this, had no idea that flying saucers was a common term in the United States of America for like a decade or more before.
Oh, well, because of shooting the...
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I had no idea. The skeet shooting. And the
skeet
funny
shooting,
thing
that's
is,
the word. Yeah, it was literally a brand name, right? Flying saucers.
Super weird. I had no idea. And I homeschool my daughter, and we go to a homeschool group once a week, and I have a very good friend there, Rich, if you're listening. Hi, Rich. And I just told him, I said, you're never going to believe this. Like, do you know why flying saucers were called something before 47? What? The Americans, I didn't give it away. I'm like, but Americans already knew this term. He said, oh yeah, my grandfather told me we used to like flying saucers like clay pigeons. I'm like, how did I do a PhD on this and not know? Like, very strange. Maybe you know what I'd like you to talk about now, though, is how Arnold becomes then, after that sighting, the first flying saucer investigator, because that's what your book's about. Your book's about the researchers and the investigators, and how this is pushed out into I guess the again the public consciousness through these people working on it. So maybe you could tell the Arnold becoming the investigator story.
Yeah, sure, happy to. So Ray Palmer, who had just had great success at Amazing Stories, teaming up with Richard Shaver, Arnold, it is so hard to talk about Ray Palmer and Kenneth Arnold without going into Arnold Palmer, a famous American golfer in my day. So anyway, keep me straight. So Ray Palmer had just had a good deal of success with teaming up with Richard Shaver, publishing his stories in Amazing Stories. And it's what is known as the Shaver mystery. It created a huge sensation. The people today don't know. I mean, it was as big as the saucer thing. Before the saucer thing, there were groups going into caves. There were people writing into Amazing Stories saying, I pushed the wrong button on an elevator and I ended up in a Darrow cave. I mean, it was crazy. And so
Can I just say quickly, because he's actually he just was commenting about something. Bob Antone, who's been a guest on the show and is a musician and a researcher and who toured me around Maury Island when I was there. He actually has a song about the Darrow and the Tarot, and it talks about the secret elevator.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so I thought you'd appreciate that. And it's
Yeah,
in my film. Thanks to Bob for giving me the song, but it's a great song. Wizard Island, it's called. People can listen to it on YouTube.
awesome. So Ziff Davis was getting called out. They were the publishers of Amazing Stories, and they were also getting hammered by the science fiction community. The science fiction community was a presage to the flying saucer community. They had zines, they had a community. They were the original fanzines were among the science fiction community. And they were really upset about these stories because they weren't science fiction. Palmer was putting them forth as based on science, some fact. So that upset a lot of people, and Ziff Davis kind of got called out in their social circles as well, saying, what are you guys doing? What kind of publishers are you? And so they basically wanted to ditch this whole thing. But a real thing that made Palmer want to leave Ziff Davis was the fact that they wanted to move to New York, and he was in Chicago and didn't want to move. So he got together with Curtis Fuller, and they formed another company during his lunch hours called Venture Press. And through that company, he published I Remember Lemuria, the big shaver book. And then he started a new magazine called Fate, and Fate still exists today, which is amazing. So another thing that happened too was that the whole Kenneth Arnold thing happened in between his Amazing Stories publication, so he didn't get a chance to put it in Amazing Stories. So he was a little late off the mark, but he jumped on it, and he also saw it as a confirmation for the whole Shaver thing, because Shaver talked about these, in one instance, these floating platforms that would go through the tunnels, Rodats, I think, or something, Rolats. And Palmer was like, these are the Rolats. This is what Shaver was talking about. So he wanted to jump into the flying saucer scene with both feet, and he contacted Arnold for his first issue of Fate magazine and wanted to get a story. He wrote, and what's awesome is the letters are available on the FBI website, the Freedom of Information Act site they started, vault.fbi.gov. So he wrote a letter to Arnold, saying, I want your story. And Arnold, I don't think Arnold wasn't too enthusiastic in the beginning. So Palmer persisted. And Arnold eventually relented. But the main thing that what happened along the way, at the same time, Palmer was contacting Arnold, trying to get his story about his sighting. The story came out about Palmer was sent some material by two gentlemen from Tacoma, Washington. And they said, we found this strange material on this island, Maury Island. And, it's really strange material. And so Palmer's basically said, and you can look at this in the FBI, between the FBI files and Coming of the Saucers, a book that Arnold and Palmer wrote together. Um, you can pick out the story, and basically Palmer. It seems that Palmer got the material from Fred Chrisman and Harold Dahl, the two gentlemen. Dahl was the primary witness who claimed to see these 6 donut-shaped saucers, one of which seemed to be having trouble, and it ended up dumping a whole bunch of material on Maury Island, burning the top of his boat, killing his dog, and injuring his son's arm. And Chrisman was his boss, and Chrisman went to check it out later and claimed to have seen another donut-shaped saucer himself. So these are the guys that sent some material to Palmer, but they didn't say it was from a UFO at the time or a flying saucer at the time. Palmer said, if you guys tell me this is from a flying saucer, I'll be interested. Oh, it's from a flying saucer. Yes, sir. Well, so he contacted Arnold and said, hey, you live out in Idaho. You're not far from Washington, and you're a flyer. Would you mind flying out to Tacoma, Washington? I'll pay your expenses, and I'll give you $200, which, not bad change back then. And check this story out for me. Arnold checked with a friend. So, you think this is right for me to accept this money? And the friend said, yeah, go for it. So off Arnold went to Tacoma, Washington to investigate the story. And the whole thing's written about in the first issue of Fate magazine, Coming of the Saucers. Coming of the Saucers, I believe, was published in 56. No, 52. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So Coming of the Saucers published in 52. And I'm sorry. And you've also got the story in the FBI file. So in the book, I went through all 3 of them to get to the skinny of this story. But in essence, though, what's interesting is that Kenneth Arnold, the first guy to see flying saucers, was also the first guy to investigate them, the first funded private investigator of flying saucers.
It's such a fascinating story. All of those things. The whole beginning of what captivates so many people today is, as you were implying then, it's super strange, and in Australia we might say dodgy. Like, it's just weird how these things come into play. Like, you're right, Chrisman and Dahl, I think, tried to say that Palmer encouraged them to suggest it was from a flying saucer, but then they also say other things to the FBI. Like, Dahl says, no, this was all real, and what I said was exactly what happened. And then there's a story of Dahl's wife threatening him to tell, when a reporter was visiting, like, just tell them the truth, tell them it's all a hoax. And like, it's so strange. Like, from the very beginning, ufology, which is what we would call it today, is so messed up with these conflicting stories. And of course, the tragedy of all of this is, whatever the reality of the crash at Maury Island, or the explosion of the UFO at Maury Island, or whatever we want to call it, is that 2 Air Force officers died investigating it. Like, when they flew back to base after they picked up the debris from, after they talked to Chrisman and Dahl, and Chrisman forced them to take a cornflakes box filled with debris back with them. When they're flying back, their plane an engine fails and it catches fire, and the two hitchhikers, as they would call them, other people from the Air Force flying with them, bail out and survive. One's seriously injured, but the two investigating officers go down in the crash. And
Davidson and Brown, and what is they evacuated that plane? They were heroes. I got to point that out. I think I don't remember the first names off the top of my head, but
it's because you remember the second names, though.
yeah, but they evacuated that plane, and then they ended up going down with it. And they were also, the reason they got involved with it is because they were the guys who investigated Arnold's sighting.
Right, Arnold. That's this great string. You're right. So Palmer calls in Arnold to investigate. Arnold goes to Maury Island, and it's getting super creepy and weird. So he calls in the Air Force. The Air Force come in, who already know him.
Yeah. Well, they were the. I'm sorry to correct it, but they were the. It was the Army Air Forces at that time.
Absolutely right.
And it was that's what makes this wonderful historically, because this is all stuff I learned when I was writing it. And so this was right at the point where the Army Air Forces was transitioning to the Air Force as we know it, and Davidson and Brown had to get back
to celebrate.
And that's why Arnold, it was late at night. Arnold and his buddy Captain E.J. Smith, who he also called in another buddy. He's like, "Help me, I'm in over my head."
And he called Smith first, and then they're overwhelmed.
Yeah,
and then they
Chrisman and Dahl were, especially if it's Fred Chrisman, basically.
That's a show right there.
Yeah, absolutely. They were getting while he was talking to Chrisman and Dahl. This guy from a local paper, a reporter from a local paper, was calling him and saying, "Hey, this guy is calling us and telling us everything that's going on in your hotel room." And so, they suspected it might have been Chrisman or Dahl, but then he got a call while he was with them, and the conversation that they had while he was with them was being relayed to this reporter. So it got really weird and really strange, and Arnold was freaking out. Yeah, so he was calling in friends. So first he called Captain E.J. Smith, who had a sighting on his own. Then he called in Davidson and Brown, and but it was late at night when they were going to leave. And they suggested, we can get out a couple of cots for you guys to sleep. And I said, no, we got to be back. So we're leaving. And they left. And yeah, as you said on the way out, Chrisman said, well, let me get you some of the debris. So he put it in a cornflakes box and gave it to him in the cornflakes box. And when the plane went down, the local paper got a call that gave the names of Davidson and Brown, and which hadn't been released by the Air Force, which gave credibility to the story. And he told the paper that crash from a flying saucer was aboard the plane when it went down. So, and also part of the Dahl claimed to have been visited by a man in black. So a guy who said if you value your family, you'll keep quiet about what you saw, kind of thing. So you've got the man in black, you've got the crash saucer debris, you've got a plane going down with it. I mean, you've got so many tropes started right there at the very beginning.
Absolutely.
But what's awesome, amazing, is that Chrisman had written to Palmer, I think it was in 1945 during the Shaver mystery, that he and a buddy were fighting in Burma in a cave. We're in a cave in Burma, and they had a battle with Darrows, and that he received, a ray gun shot from a Darrow. These are the underground dwelling ne'er-do-wells of the Shaver mystery, who influence us up here on Earth with mind-controlling rays, and etc. So yeah, he said a buddy of his received, I think, a dime-sized hole in his hand from a Darrow ray gun. And so this is Fred Chrisman in 1945. So he's by 1947, he's inserted himself into two mysteries, and both via Palmer. So, Palmer essentially, I mean, there, yeah, he's part of the Darrow mystery, part of the flying saucer mystery, and then what's even crazier is JFK. Jim Garrison, who was running the Clay Shaw trial during the JFK for his JFK assassination investigation, got an anonymous letter from somebody saying, "Well, the first person Clay Shaw would call when he was in trouble was Fred Chrisman." So, oh well, we better subpoena him. So you can actually find Fred Chrisman's a transcription of Fred Chrisman's testimony at the Clay Shaw trial. So there's Fred Chrisman in the middle of 1, 2, 3 huge major mysteries. So it's just
crazy.
yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
I'll tell you a story that actually, in fact, I'll put up an image which I didn't qualify when you were chatting before about Maury Island. When I was there on the anniversary of the Maury Island incident last year, so almost a year and a couple of days ago, and I know that Bob Antone is in the chat tonight. There's myself and Bob on the shoreline of
Mhm.
Maury Island, 77 years after the incident, to the day of the Maury Island incident. And what I'm sure you'll be just as fascinated, if not more fascinated, with this story, which some of the listeners of the show have heard before, but it's worth telling again, is there have been History Channel type shows and, various UFO shows about trying to find the Maury Island wreckage and like people diving into the harbor in Puget Sound looking for it, going to the woodline and looking for it. But there's always been pieces of the Maury Island crash, if you believe something happened, since 1947, because what happened? Who did they send the crash pieces to before they gave it to the Army Air Force? Chrisman and Dale.
Ray Palmer.
So who
Yeah.
still holds a piece of the?
Well, I heard you on Conspiranormal, so
Right.
not to blow your thing, but yeah,
It's all right. Yeah,
and you held it. I mean, that I find that just I remember you this. I mean, you must have felt like a little kid because I know I did when I went.
did.
I've held some objects in my hand. I held the Lost Creek saucer that Gray Parker and Jim Mosley. That was at the Clarksburg Harrison Public Library. So the excitement I felt just this is a piece of history. But I mean,
That's what it feels like. Even whether it's real or not, it's
fake. It doesn't matter. Yeah,
to hold it.
Yeah, I mean that's important. We the way I approach the subject and the way I keep my head about me, having, I've had paranormal experiences. I've talked about them on other podcasts, but ghosts at the Met, one that likes to wake me up by wiggling my feet, and during lunchtime naps, I've had psychic dreams, but I've never had a UFO sighting. So as far as that goes, I can't say I'm a knower. Believer, I believe there are UFO reports, and what people say is absolutely fascinating, and I do see a lot of the commonalities I see that most people don't know about, such as Cleid conjunctivitis, which is eye burn, and sunburn, and things like black urine, these physical things, and the way people are, constantly told, don't be afraid, which is really interesting because that's what the angels always say in the Bible when they meet people, don't be afraid.
That's interesting.
But I mean, there are commonalities throughout that are not really well known beyond the UFO community that I see in all the reports. So as far as that goes, I can't discount it. Which I think is important because I enjoy the hoaxes and um, the hoaxes and the sensationalism and the characters of ufology. I look at it as being a very human thing, and I write with the rigor of a journalist and an historian. Basically, I discovered I have that rigor because I think it's just obsession, because I obsessively went to original sources close to the event as much as possible. Just searching, and I would literally spend hours for one sentence. Sometimes I write a blog every single week for Martin Willis and have done so I think since 2018. So it's usually one case or a flap or cases in a country. So I've covered a hell of a lot of cases, and you know I you find patterns and you see things that, like, this comes up again and again and again and again and again, and it's not something that's celebrated in documentaries or in ufotainment, and it adds credibility to these cases and some of the stories too, especially the more ridiculous ones. It's just like, wow, why, and especially when it's, somebody who's got a good job and a family, and then they come out with this outrageous story. Like, I was given, oh, this guy didn't have a family, Joe Simonton, I was given space pancakes.
That's down the road. That's not too far from where I am, by the way.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Is this? Yeah, Eagle River, Wisconsin. Yes, sir. Joe Simonton, 1961. This is in the book too. A saucer. He claimed a saucer landed in his driveway, and he went out to meet it and opened up, and there were some creatures, 3 creatures there. He described as swarthy, like Italians. I think wearing like turtleneck kind of outfits, and one seemed to be cooking at a grill, tethered to a grill. Another tethered. A couple of straps from his waist to an instrument panel. And the one who greeted him at the door made a motion like drinking, and Simonton says, "Oh, water." And he gave him this weird vessel. Simonton went, filled the vessel, gave it to the creature. Simonton's story, that creature drank it and said thanks, noticed that Simonton was looking at the creature cooking on the griddle, cooking flapjacks, and turned around and gave him 3 of them. And then the saucer took off. And what's awesome in the description, he says the saucer took off, it tilted up, it shot off, and the tree behind it bent back and then sprung up. So it's like this cartoon. But what is really awesome about this story is that Robert Friend, the head of Project Blue Book, thought that this case should be investigated because he was afraid NICAP, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, headed by Donald Kehoe, Kehoe was like the big disclosure guy. He was strongly lobbying Congress, saying, get the government to fess up what they know about UFOs, or at least take this subject seriously. And he wrote books, Flying Saucers Are Real, UFO, Flying Saucers from Outer Space. So Kehoe believed in aliens. He believed that the things people were seeing were alien craft, and he had a lot of powerful people behind him. So anyway, what Robert Friend didn't know was that Kehoe was in the midst of putting out this book called it was a book for Congress, and it was written by Richard Hall.
Mm-hmm.
The name's not coming to me right now.
I know the book.
Yeah, the UFO investigation, whatever. It was like a compilation of the best cases that NICAP had, and NICAP was in existence since 1956. So this was 1961. So that was their main focus. And Simonton had gone to a buddy of his, somebody knew, a local judge who ran a UFO study group, and brought him the pancake and said, "Hey, this is what happened to me. I'm going to tell me what to do about this." And so the judge sent the pancake, piece of pancake to NICAP to be analyzed, and then told the press, "Yeah, NICAP's on it. They're investigating, and they're going to analyze my pancake." And meantime, they're like, "No, we're not." And so what ultimately happened is J. Allen Hynek went down there with two of his Northwestern University students, and the pictures, I have them in the book. They're adorable. These two kids out there like measuring things on Simonton's farm. And what happened is Hynek went to a restaurant with Simonton and then excused himself and went to the bar and started chatting people up, asking about Simonton's reputation. And found, yeah, this guy's straight up. If he says he saw something, he saw something. And so, Hynek was a bit flummoxed. Hynek's big problem was the fact that, it was a single witness. And he believed in there was a Roman saying, one witness equals no witness. But the idea that this guy had this outrageous story and yet was a respectable citizen, and everybody, it kind of flummoxed him. But what was outrageous is he sent on taxpayer dollars, got a piece of the pancake and sent it out to the FDA to be analyzed. It was also analyzed by a local Air Force officer who got a hold of it as well. He sent it to another lab. I forget which lab. And they found it had, the stuff you would have in a buckwheat pancake, salt, buckwheat flour, et cetera, et cetera. So they did their due diligence, and meanwhile, NICAP got hammered by its membership. How could you ignore this story? The Air Force investigated it. You didn't. You guys are obviously biased. And they accused Kehoe of, doing what he was accusing the Air Force of doing, which is covering up and, obfuscating. So
I'll jump in quickly to that. Do you know the key agitator of all of that? Nobody does. It's been all but forgotten.
The key agitator
of NICAP covering up the Joe Simonton case.
No, who?
Ray Palmer. He did an issue of Flying Saucer magazine, the only newsstand magazine at the time, Flying Saucers, and he did a cover story with NICAP on the cover saying the National Investigative Committee on Non-Investigations.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And there's a whole the judge's letter, the judge's frustration that you mentioned before about their lack of action.
Yeah.
According to Alan Greenfeld, who's in the documentary, my documentary I'm making, and he makes a good point. Palmer essentially says it's a CIA front. At the same time, Mosley in News says it's an Air Force front.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this massive schism in ufology, which has been forgotten because we talk about the ahistoricity of ufology. Nobody remembers anything.
Jack Brewer wrote a really good treatment on the whole thing of NICAP as the CIA connection.
Right.
He wasn't able to come to any, firm conclusions.
It's clear.
It's a compelling argument.
Yeah, I agree.
And I like Jack Brewer's. My favorite idea of Brewer's regarding that is that the CIA set up fronts, essentially, and things that they thought could be useful. And, as to how much they actually used NICAP is what's in question. And, another use for UFO groups by intelligence agencies, for instance, is to send stuff down the pipe to see where, leaks might come up in UFO magazines. Like if you tell somebody who's just come in some secret inside UFO information, and then all of a sudden that shows up in a UFO magazine, then you know that this is a guy you can't trust. But anyway, yeah, the CIA. I mean, Roscoe Hillenkoetter was the very first, as a board member of nascent NICAP, and Roscoe Hillenkoetter was the first director of the CIA. So yeah, I'm from the get go.
And it's those kind of weird intelligence and military and insider connections continue to this day with, although it's kind of disappeared now from the spotlight, but to the Stars Academy, which was such a big deal a number of years ago, allegedly kind of started by Tom DeLonge, one of the old frontmen of Blink-182 and still one of the frontmen of the band Angels and Airwaves, which I really love, by the way. I love both of those bands. But the idea that there was this, this organization capable of releasing the Tic Tac videos. But when you look at all of the people who are on his board, they're all military or intelligence people. Same with NICAP.
Well, I mean, come on, Hal Puthoff. These people are woo people. I mean, freaking John Allen. There's this. See, this is all Crash, Saucers, and Malevolent Aliens. I got into that, and it leads up into that. And this is all the essentially what I came to. I when I wrote the book, I quoted sources, and it's basically, this is what other people are saying more than what I'm saying. So when I write in general, when I do my blogs, when I do my books, it's all explorations. I'm exploring, and the way I do it is my sources I make as accessible to the reader as possible. So, I read books and I'll recommend the books, but I'd like to, like in my blogs, I put links to all my sources. So, here's the Flying Saucer Review, Volume 25, Number 6, 1980. Go right there. Here's this, blah, blah, blah. So I like to give my readers the opportunity to do their own exploring and get a sense of where the archives are. So I believe my readers, are educated that way. They know where to go to find the original sources. And so with Crash Saucers, I continued with that and showed the arguments people were making against it. I originally wanted to call the book Press Reset because, there's so much BS that's still in the pipeline that should be just gone. And it's even being talked about in Congress now. And, I'll say it, Roswell, okay? Rubber, sticks, paper, tape.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that's in the original reports. I mean, that's what Brazel said he found on his freaking ranch.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And that blew up. And if you go to the MJ-12 documents, the date where they found the aliens was wrong. Arnold, Brazel found that wreckage before flying saucers were even a thing. It was before June 24th. I think it was June 18th, whatever. But he found the wreckage before flying saucers were even a thing. And once they were a thing, that's why he brought it up, and then it blew up. and everything. I'm not okay. I'm not going to get passionate about
No, it's easy
debunking.
to.
I'll never be the last word on
No,
any of
it's
this.
easy to. I
But
have two. I have.
what I'm saying is mainly the argument I made was like go to the original sources and see where this story got blown up, and it really got blown up by Charles Billitz and William Moore. And Charles Billitz is
Absolutely.
responsible for the Philadelphia experiment, the Bermuda Triangle, and the Roswell and incident. And if you read his freaking books, you'll see this is all his sources are laughable. I mean, he has Gray Barker as a source. Okay, he has George Hunt Williamson as a source for CIA housing flying saucers. I mean, God, I love Gray Barker. All of a
I would
sudden,
trust Barker before I would trust William Moore.
yeah,
We know
because-
William Moore was an AFOSI asset. Like we know that for a fact.
yeah.
And ufology seems to want it two ways. They want to be able to curse William Moore for deceiving them at the MUFON convention
Yeah.
in 1989.
But
They want
essentially,
to keep everything that William Moore told them, including the Roswell story, including the dark side hypothesis, including everything else. It's very strange.
yeah. So Flying Saucer Investigators was a joy to write, and it's once you get to 1980, things go to crap. As far as I'm concerned, and I wrote Flying Crash Saucers to get that out of the way, and now I'm writing the UFO Investigators to show that these are the this is the more credible stuff. These are the cases. I mean, I'd say credible. I mean, the humanoid cases abound in the 70s. Things get really weird, but there were some, serious investigators. As Keel was in his prime in the 70s.
Right.
That's when the Mothman prophecies came out.
Right.
And there were some amazing cases then. But the Flying Saucer Investigators was just a joy to write because it's all these earnest people. It was a very small community. It wasn't highly commercialized. It wasn't UFOtainment, and UFOtainment is, I have fun, folks. I appreciate that people enjoy the subject their own way, but I enjoy it as an historian. So, and when like I said, when I all my writing is more of a record of my journey so that others can take the journey themselves. But I gotta say I am disgusted with what's happening right now with the way it's being discussed in Congress. The fact that
It's ahistorical.
Ross Coldhart is like a superstar who is just. Anyway, I don't want to rant and rave.
No, but the disclosure movement today is ahistorical.
What people should be talking about is the fact that the freaking APRO files, which have been, Area Phenomena Research Organization, okay, they're responsible for so many famous cases, the cases that everybody knows about. Okay, Travis Walton, APRO. Okay, I'm not able to list them off the top of my head right now, but
and there's all the great books as well from the Lawrensons back then. There's so many significant.
and
they were looking at humanoid encounter reports before NICAP was comfortable to look at them.
Yeah, and like the Carl Higdon case comes from them. Not from them, but they investigated it. But they did a lot of earnest. They had an incredible network.
And in fairness to David Paulides, by the way, Paulides picked up that case again, which had been all but forgotten or ignored for years.
What, the Higdon case?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah. In his documentary, I think it's in one of his books as well. But it is a
Mm,
documentary, Missing 411, the UFO Connection or
mm.
whatever it's called. The Higdon case plays a massive part in that documentary.
Oh,
Like I said,
wow.
big section of it.
That's one of my favorite cases. It's amazing.
It's so
But
strange.
yeah, but where I was leading up to is the fact that David Marler got a hold of the APRO files. David Marler's out in Rio Rancho, New Mexico, and the Rio Rancho school system gave him a couple of buildings as a proof of concept kind of thing
Wow.
for a research center. And so he's got the entire APRO files, he's got the entire QFOS files, and he's got the entire NICAP files, which is an historical research source. Like, are you kidding me? This is it. The amount of data there, and he's got volunteers. He's struggling, and nobody knows about it. I mean, you didn't.
But by the way, I was at one of the QFOS addresses near Evanston the other day.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. So, this should be like a mecca for people. Should be people from Congress should be
I had
going
no idea.
there. This is just an unbelievable resource. And that's what people should be talking about. They shouldn't be talking about these idiot whistleblowers who come out and say, I heard from a guy who heard from a guy. And that's what's interesting is it's kind of where I was headed with my rant about when I got into crash saucers. A big thing that came out of my journey in that book was there's this big feedback loop going on between military intelligence insiders who have an interest in UFOs, who believe there's something to it, who reach out to UFO investigators, flying saucer investigators, and say, well, I heard this. And then the flying saucer investigator goes and tells another flying saucer investigator, hey, this guy said he heard this. And then this flying saucer investigator goes to another military intelligence insider and says, hey, this guy said he heard this. Let me look into it. Yeah, another guy said he heard this. And so this stuff starts bouncing around. And, if you listen to all the stuff going on in Congress, nobody's given any proof. It's all anecdotal evidence. And, well, fine. Anyway, one interesting thing I found in writing the flying saucer investigators was the amount of it's physical injury. there are a lot of cases of physical injury, and that's trace evidence actually. Unfortunately, the flying saucer investigators kind of, well, I mean, I know medical records are tricky, but if you've got the witness there and he could give you a copy of his medical records, that would have been a good thing to keep. And they're not out there. That's a kind of a strange thing.
That is, and certainly there's cases of people being injured by approaches to UFOs, and there's lots of cases in Brazil. There's the famous case in Canada. The man's name escapes me now. And there's
Stephen McCulloch.
There you go. And the Cashlundrum.
And what's awesome is David Marler has his burned glove and his burned T-shirt on display out in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. So, yeah.
Crazy. I do have a question for you though, before we go from an audience member. Firstly, it's from Horace Smith, who is Professor Emeritus of Astronomy and Physics at Michigan State University, a very good friend of the show. He's also been on the show, and he initially said he was looking particularly forward to this episode since he's read your book, The Flying Saucer Investigators. And then he asked a little later, it's a little off topic, he said, but I will ask you anyway because he he wanted me to ask you, and he said, off topic, saucer investigator Lex Mabane had a 1956 paper published in an academic media journal. Does Mr. Lear know why Professor Lincoln LaPaz, who apparently was green fireballs, is what Horace
Yeah.
put in, encouraged Melbane's investigations? I don't know the answer, but maybe you do, or maybe you don't.
No, I don't. I know about the whole green fireball thing in Lincoln La Paz. Lincoln La Paz was, you know, a well-known scientist back in the day, and they had this weird episodes of green fireballs. I think it mainly over New Mexico, and it's a mystery that still hasn't been solved. But I didn't know Lex Meebane investigated that, so I'll look into that. Thank you for cluing me into that, Horace.
Another question for you before we go, Charles, is from Bob Antone, also a very good friend of mine, a good friend of the show. He's been a guest on the show numerous times. I mentioned before he wrote a song about the Darrow and the Terror and secret elevators called Wizard Island, which is amazing. And he toured me around, and it appears in my documentary, "The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers," at Maury Island, literally 77 years after the event. But Bob asks you, what is your opinion on Betty and Barney Hill?
I definitely believe there's something to it. The interesting thing about it is that's the first time hypnotic regression was. I'm not confident enough to say it was the first time hypnotic regression was used in an abduction case. I'm not sure. Leo Sprinkle was one of the pioneers of it, but the guy who did it, Benjamin Simonton, I believe, he had used hypnotic regression, basically dealing with before it was even a word, post-traumatic stress disorder, for veterans, and so he had used hypnotic regression as therapy for them. There's actually a documentary made about his work. I forget what it's called, but essentially there is a file by Walter Webb, who actually wrote it for NICAP, which hated the case because it's too close to a contactee report for them. But I think you can find that. I believe you can find it. It's in my book. I think it's in Crash Saucers, or it should be in Flying Saucer Investigators. I think it's in Flying Saucer Investigators. Essentially, I'm sorry. I believe you can find it on the NICAP website. Walter Webb wrote the file on it. And what's really interesting is there's a whole. He investigated before they got regressed, and then he added addendums after they got regressed. And there's a huge portion of the story that they told that was before hypnotic regression. So I definitely believe there's something to it. A lot of people try and put it into I know that the boys down at Conspiranormal, not the boys, in particular,
Adam Sane.
Adam Sane, yeah, Adam. Adam really likes the idea that it was a psyop operation because they were a mixed marriage couple in the 60s and active, I think, in the NAACP. But in any case, I take it at face value, and there's a definite description of a craft. There's a description of seeing creatures in the craft. There's missing time. So, it's got a lot of elements, and that especially the fact that it's a proto abduction case. So, the idea of missing time wasn't even really a thing when they recorded it.
Martin Kottmeyer has done some incredible work on that as well. He's one of the perhaps almost overlooked, psychosocial guys. Like his writings are quite phenomenal, and he isn't recognized as much as he should be. So if people Google Martin Kottmeyer and Betty and Barney Hill, there are papers out there by him that they can find.
Yeah, unfortunately, Betty kind of went off the rails in her later days. She got called out by UFO investigators. She was seeing things everywhere and having saucer watch parties. And
well, it's weird, isn't it? Like, back to Arnold quickly. You're right, because Kenneth Arnold was a repeater as well. Was one of these people who'd seen saucers multiple times. Like when he flew out to Maury Island after his initial famous sighting, he saw saucers again, according to Coming of the Saucers. And
like golden
life he did also.
Yeah, like some weird golden objects, right?
So weird. Anyway, we could. I'm going to have you back on because who I wanted to talk about tonight as well, really badly with you, and you mentioned them and we didn't hit them, was Jim Moseley, who I knew before he passed, and I had fun with him when I hung out with him once. And Gray Barker, who died when I was only very young. So I never
my two favorite characters. And,
fantastic.
Yeah, and covered extensively in the book, by the way.
They are. And so that's a place we didn't get to because there's so much in the Flying Saucer Investigators. We could talk about every chapter for a show almost, and we need to get you on to talk about what's the other book, Crash Saucers and
Malevolent Aliens.
And Malevolent Aliens, which is also we'll get you on to do that one next, and then maybe one day we'll do the Moseley and the Barker episode. Tell people where they can get your books anyway, if you could, Charles.
Okay, well, I am unfortunately competing against myself because my former publisher, Philip Mantle, has closed up shop for health reasons. And so the first edition of my book, that's what you get when you Google the Flying Saucer Investigators. So the best way to find it is to go to Amazon, type in Charles Lear in the search, and all my books will show up. And that's pretty much it for me.
Yeah. That makes sense. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. Great chat.
Oh, it's such a pleasure talking to you. I look forward to your Ray Palmer, Richard Shaver documentary. I think it's wonderful that you're doing it, and that you've gone so deeply into it. I'm very impressed.
Well, thank you. I hope you'll be available to sit for an interview with me when I'm out east for my final trip.
I would be happy to. Absolutely, yes, yes.
In August, actually. So
yeah. I mean, I repeatedly ended up saying on podcast after podcast, talking about their relationship, that it was extremely touching. It just came through. I was like, just especially listening to them on the Long John Nebel show. It was like, wow, these guys are really friends, and Palmer really, it backs this guy. And yeah, I mean, just the fact, that this poor Shaver would have just been, a complete wreckage if it wasn't for Palmer. And he also gave Palmer a lot in return. It's an amazing story, and I'm glad you're doing it. So anyway, thank you. Thank you.
I agree with you. There was a codependent relationship there, and we're richer for it. But until I talk to you again, Charles, which hopefully will be in about a minute after the show finishes, and until I talk to everybody else out there, which will be same weird time, same weird network, the Untold Radio Network, next week, Tuesday at 9 p.m. live, or on any of your podcast platforms after that time, please keep it weird.